Welcome back. Today I share a tale of love that refused to be buried. In a land where mercy had long dried up, this story was shaped by dust, silence, and memory. The memory of a man named Nakoa and the woman who once defied the world to love him. The desert remembers broken vows and the hearts that keep waiting. 3 years had passed since Nakoa last saw his home. 3 years since bugles and gunfire dragged him away from the valley where his life once made sense. Now he rode alone, a scarred saddle beneath him, a rifle strapped across his back, and the echo of countless battles lodged deep in his thoughts. War had marked him, not only in flesh but in the quiet spaces between his heartbeats. The army had used him for what he was, half-Apache, half-white. To the officers, he belonged nowhere. He was a tool-tracker scout guide through land others feared. To his own people, he was a traitor who had walked beside the enemy. And to himself, he was simply a man trying to survive long enough to earn the right to come home. The trail cut through country, known only to wind and time dry. Creek beds murmuring cottonwoods, mesquite drifting through the evening air. He rode with the patience of someone who had learned that life offers no shortcuts, only endurance. Beyond the low hills lay the valley of his youth, the only place that had ever truly felt like home. In his mind he could still see it, the small cabin tucked beside the creek. He remembered her laughter riding the wind, the light in her eyes when she spoke his name. Elin. She had been 19 when she chose him, slender, soft-spoken, yet fearless enough to stand against the world. Against every warning and every whisper she married him. A white woman and an Apache man, shame to some, salvation to them. Together they built a life no one believed would endure. She tended a modest garden beside the cabin. He broke horses, hunted game, and carved dignity from dust and danger. He could still feel the day he left her arms wrapped around him on the porch, her voice shaking as she whispered, "Promise me you'll come back." And he had promised. God help him. That promise echoed now as the sun bled red across the ridges. He rode back into the valley, an older man, scarred, worn, but still carrying her name in the hidden corners of his soul. The creek appeared first silver beneath the fading light, winding through grass like a thread of memory. Then the cabin. At first hope rose, it still stood framed by the same cottonwoods where he once tied his horse. But as he drew closer, hope turned to pain. The roof sagged. Shutters hung loose. The fence that once guarded her garden lay collapsed and choked with weeds. The hearth that once breathed warmth sat cold and gray. No laughter, no light, only a hollow silence. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching on dry earth, and pushed the door open. Inside, the air smelled of years-old dust. The table stood bare. The quilt she had sewn was gone. Only shadows remained. Weighted by what had once been Nakoa stood there, unmoving. He had survived war, but this emptiness cut deeper than any bullet. He imagined her waiting her smile when he returned the tears, the arms that would pull him home again. Instead, there were only echoes. He stepped outside and stared toward the horizon. The world had moved on. Maybe she had too. He walked to the creek and knelt, plunging his hands into the cold water. It hadn't changed, the same ripples, the same stones polished smooth by time. The water kept moving, just as life had carried her away from him. He sat there in silence as dusk settled, and the first stars flickered awake above the ridges. She had been more than his wife. She had been proof that he could belong to something greater than war. Then a voice broke the quiet. A ranch hand guiding mules along the road stopped and studied him warily. "You looking for someone?" the man asked, eyes narrowed. "Apache." Nakoa stood. His voice was steady but heavy. "A woman. Elin Rowe. She lived here once." The man frowned, glancing at the abandoned cabin, then spoke words, sharp as a blade. "She's alive, but she ain't yours anymore." The words hung in the air, final and cruel. Nakoa's breath caught. Alive. The word was both blessing and curse. She lived but not with him, not waiting as he had dreamed through countless nights beneath army canvas. Someone else had taken his place. He turned away from the fading light, eyes fixed on the darkening horizon where the desert swallowed promises whole. The desert wind rose carrying mesquite and something far older, the ache of promises left behind. For the first time since the war, Nakoa felt beaten. He had returned to reclaim his heart, only to learn it now rested with another man as night folded over the valley. He breathed her name once, barely louder than the wind, as if the stars might remember it better than she had Elin. Then he swung into the saddle and rode on a lone shape swallowed by darkness. Silence followed, and a vow the desert never forgot. By dawn, the valley lay still beneath a thin skin of mist. The sun climbed slowly over the ridges, spilling gold across sage and cottonwoods. Nakoa headed for town, not from want, but from need, because truth waited there. The trail toward Red Hollow had changed since his last ride. Fresh fences cut the land. Smoke from a dozen chimneys drifted on the air. Civilization had crept closer, louder, rougher, more certain of its claim. As Nakoa reached the edge of town, his horse's hooves rang on the wooden street. The sound drew a hush. Men posted outside the saloon turned to stare. Talk died. Someone spat. Another muttered Apache. He kept his eyes ahead. He knew the looks, the mix of fear, curiosity, and contempt. To them, he was a shadow out of the hills, a remnant they wished erased. But he hadn't come for them. He came for her. The general store, the blacksmith, the church bell at the far end familiar yet altered. Time had laid a new skin over everything. He felt like a ghost moving through the ruins of his own life. He stopped near the dressmaker's shop, its windows dressed in lace and sun-faded ribbons. That was where he saw her Elin, and the world paused. She stood inside the shop, sunlight pouring through the glass and settling on her like gold. Her hair had lightened, touched with honey and a faint thread of silver at the temples. Her hands, still graceful, held a fold of blue cloth against her chest as she spoke with the seamstress. She was older, yes, yet more beautiful than memory allowed. Not the beauty of youth, but the kind forged by surviving everything meant to break you. Beside her stood a tall man, broad-shouldered, steady on his feet. His voice drifted through the open door, low and warm. Orson Pike. The name burned through Nakoa like a brand. Once they had ridden side by side, breaking horses, sharing whiskey, laughing like brothers. Now that same man stood at Elan's side as though the years had chosen him instead. Nakoa's gaze dropped. A small boy stood at her skirts, no more than 3. He clutched a carved wooden horse, its paint worn thin at the edges. The child's laughter spilled into the street, unguarded, pure. Then the boy turned. For a heartbeat, their eyes met through the glass. Dark eyes, almond-shaped, the color of river stone after rain, eyes that mirrored the man staring back. Nakoa froze, his hand still on the reins. He didn't breathe. He didn't need blood to tell him what his heart already knew. The boy's hair, midnight black. The faint bronze of his skin. The tilt of his head when he smiled. It was like seeing himself reborn, time holding up a mirror. Nakoa's throat tightened. He looked away, dragging air into his lungs. Maybe it was chance, he told himself. Maybe the desert was playing tricks as it does when a man wants something too badly. But deep inside, where truth shows no mercy, he knew. That boy was his. Outside, a wagon rattled past, wheels grinding over gravel, breaking the spell. The wagon's wheels ground over the gravel, snapping the moment in two. Nakoa glanced back just in time to see Orson Pike lift the boy onto his shoulders the way a father does when pride pushes pain aside. Elin laughed, the sound Nakoa had carried with him through years of war. Hearing it now, cut deep like a blade turned slow. Her smile was easy, natural, the practiced ease of a woman who had learned how to live again. Nakoa caught the brim of his hat and pulled it low, hiding his face. The moment he had dreamed of had finally come, and it broke him. He turned away before the weight of it crushed the breath from his chest. Behind him, the desert wind carried voices. Her laughter again. The boy's small cry of "Papa." Orson's calm voice answered softly. Each step Nakoa took away from that window felt heavier than the last. He passed the saloon, the blacksmith shop, the old well, the very place where he and Orson once traded stories. Everywhere he went, the town seemed to hum with a life that had gone on without him. He rode out of town without looking back. The sun climbed higher, harsh, unforgiving, bleaching color from everything it touched. By the time the buildings slipped behind the hills, Nakoa felt as though he had left part of himself behind in that dusty street. The part that still believed in promises. He reined in near a stand of cottonwoods, the same trees that had sheltered his childhood. The air lay still, broken only by the whisper of leaves. He closed his eyes. He saw Elin's face again, the curve of her mouth when she smiled, the gentle tilt of her head, the light in her eyes that had never gone out. He could still hear her voice riding the wind. "Come back to me, Nakoa." And he had come back only to find her gone. Not to death, but to another life. The ache was sharp, yet beneath it something else stirred, older, restless, like thunder building far away. Love or jealousy, or the cruel mix of both men like him were born to carry. He opened his eyes and stared toward the horizon. The sun sank again, bleeding red across the ridges. Somewhere beyond that sunset waited a truth he wasn't ready to face but could never outrun. A man might ride away from war, but he cannot ride away from his own blood. That night, as the stars returned one by one, Nakoa made a silent vow. He would not face her yet, not until he knew everything. The truth, the lies, and the story that lived between them. No matter how far he rode, one image burned in his mind, the small boy with dark eyes laughing in sunlight beside the woman he once called home. Memory is a strange thing. It never asks permission. It rises like smoke from a fire you thought long dead thin. At first, then choking, relentless. For Nakoa, that night's ride through the desert held no present, only ghosts. And every ghost wore her face. He remembered the first time he saw Elin row 19 barefoot on her father's porch, laughter lifting above the wind. She was hanging laundry when a gust caught a sheet and sent it flying. A flash of white against the sun. He caught it before it touched the dust. Their hands brushed for the first time. She smiled, not shy, not careful, but with that fearless curiosity some people are born carrying. "Your gray hawk," she said. "The Apache horsebreaker." He nodded, then half ashamed, half proud. And that was where it began. In quiet looks, in pauses that lingered, the glances they shared, the smiles that stayed a heartbeat too long, the moments that refused to end. The town noticed. Of course they did. Elin Rowe, the girl, seen walking with an Apache. A disgrace, they said. A sin. They whispered it like a verdict. But Elin had never cared much for the world's permission. She told him so once, standing barefoot by the creek. "Let them talk," she said quietly. "The world has never been kind to people who love beyond its fences." That same night, beneath a sky tangled in cottonwood branches, they married in the plainest way two souls could choose, by spoken vows and firelight. No preacher, no witnesses, but the stars. For a time that was enough. They built their cabin together from rough-cut timber, a stone hearth, a small stretch of soil where Elin planted beans and corn and wildflowers she refused to name. Nakoa hunted game, broke horses for nearby ranches, and sometimes sang low Apache songs. At dusk, songs his mother once hummed beside the fire. Elin would sit close, her head resting on his shoulder, listening as if those words belonged to her too. It wasn't an easy life, but it was theirs. In the few years they were given, they learned that love doesn't ask for permission, only courage. Then the war came. A summons from the army, desperate for scouts who knew the land better than any map. Nakoa had sworn he would never fight another man's war, but he believed this one might be different, if he served, if he proved himself. Maybe the world would stop calling him an enemy. Maybe the peace he dreamed of for them could finally be earned. He told Ellen he would go. She stood on the porch that day, her dress snapping in the wind, eyes bright with fear and pride. "You can't fight their battles, Nakoa," she said. "You'll die in a war that was never yours." "If I stay," he answered, "they'll never stop coming. If I fight, maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll see reason." He believed it. He believed courage could change hearts. Later he would learn that courage is not always enough. The day he left, Ellen pressed her hand against his chest and whispered, "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," he said, and he meant it with every breath he had. Spring never came for her. Months passed without letters, without word. The nights stretched longer. By the time autumn returned, the first snow tapped against her window, and Elin knew, deep in her bones, that something had gone terribly wrong. Then the letter arrived. It came on a bitter morning, carried by a young soldier with pity in his eyes, von Kessler. He handed her the folded paper and murmured, "He was brave, ma'am. They said he died near the San Carlos line." She remembered how her hands shook as she read the neat black ink. Private Nakoa fell in service to the United States Army. The words struck like gunfire. The world went silent. She buried his knife by the creek and wore black for a year. But grief weighs more when carried alone, and the Red Hollow folk offered little mercy. They whispered as she passed. Apache's widow, they called her. Some pitied her. Most turned away. She was young, unprotected, and soon her body began to change. By late winter she felt the first flutter of life inside her. His life. And the same world that judged her love now condemned her survival. That winter was merciless. The garden failed early. Snow crept through the leaking roof. Her hands split from cold and labor. Hunger became familiar. The child was due in spring, but Elin was no longer sure she would live to see it. That was when Orson Pike returned, Nakoa's friend, the man who had once shared whiskey and campfire laughter with him. Orson Pike had been out driving cattle when word of Nakoa's death reached the valley. By the time he rode back and saw Elin Rowe standing alone, thin shaken, near breaking something in him, refused to let her disappear. He brought flour. He patched the leaking roof. He split wood without being asked. He never spoke a word of pity, only showed up. When the hour came, he stayed through the labor, hauling water, holding her hand when the pain tore through her. And when the child was born, when that small, fierce cry filled the cabin, Elin looked into the baby's dark eyes and whispered the father's name, Nakoa. Orson turned away, then giving her room to grieve. But he did not leave. He helped her bury fear beneath the work of living, mending, planting, tending. And when the whispers sharpened into knives, he offered marriage, not out of want, but as a shield against the town's cruelty. She refused at first. Then the world closed in. A widow with a half-Apache child would not survive another winter alone. So she said yes. Their marriage was quiet. No vows of love. No dreams of forever. Only survival and a small grace born of gratitude. Orson never asked for more than she could give, and Elin never gave less than kindness. Yet at night, by the fire with her son asleep in her arms, her thoughts drifted to the man the world insisted was gone. Now, years later, that same man sat beneath the stars alive, unaware of how completely his name had been buried. He thought of Elin's laughter, of the home they built, of the promise he made beneath a dying sun. As the night deepened, one truth rose above the rest: the world had moved on. Only his heart had not. By the time Nakoa returned to town, the sun stood high and hard in a cloudless sky. He had not planned to see her so soon, but fate has little patience for a man's plans. The streets of Red Hollow were alive, wagons rattling past, men calling for lumberwomen, carrying baskets from the market. Life, it seemed, went on easily for those who had never lost it. Nakoa rode in quietly, hat pulled low, every movement measured. He felt the eyes follow him, whispers curling behind him like smoke. To them, he was still what he had always been, an outsider, a reminder of a war they would rather forget. He dismounted near the blacksmith shop, meaning only to trade for supplies, and ride back out. But the world had other ideas. A familiar sound caught him, the sound of her voice. Faint, lilting, unmistakable. He turned. And there she was, Elin, standing in the sunlight, a bundle of mended clothes in her arms. The wind teased her hair, the same hair he once brushed from her face, now tied neat beneath a bonnet. Beside her stood the boy, his son tugging impatiently at her skirt. For a heartbeat, everything else vanished. The street, the voices, the heat. Years collapsed into a single suspended moment. Her eyes lifted, searching, uncertain. Then she saw him. Color drained from her face. Her lips parted, and her voice, barely a breath, said his name, Nakoa. Hearing it from her mouth struck him harder than any bullet. He took a slow step toward her, his heart beating hard in his chest. But before another word could find the air, a shadow cut across her path. Orson Pike stepped out from the blacksmith's doorway. His sleeves were rolled, his stance calm but unyielding. The boy moved without thinking, running straight to him and gripping his father's leg. Nakoa stopped where he stood. For a breath, no one spoke. Then Orson's voice came low, measured. Nakoa. Nakoa inclined his head slightly. Orson. Silence stretched tight as wire. Years of brotherhood and betrayal balanced on a single breath. At last Nakoa spoke, his voice steady, controlled. Did you think I'd never come back? Ilin's eyes shone. Her hands shook around the bundle of clothes. The question hung there unanswered. Around them, the red hollow folk had begun to notice faces peering from windows, murmurs rippling down the street. That's him, the Apache she married. Thought he was dead. A white woman, and her ghost. Judgment cut sharper than the heat. Ilin's gaze flicked to the crowd, then back to Nakoa. Her lips parted, trembling, but no words came, only the naked truth in her eyes. Grief, guilt, and something far older, a love that hadn't died, only gone quiet. Nakoa stepped closer, dust lifting around his boots. I came home, he said softly. To you. Her breath caught. Orson shifted, not in anger, but in protection. He placed himself like a quiet barrier between them, and spoke without heat, his tone carrying both authority and care. Not here, Nakoa. Not like this. His eyes swept the watching faces. He knew the town's cruelty as well as anyone. Come to my place tonight, he said. We'll talk the way men should. The words hung heavy invitation and warning in one. Nakoa studied him for a long moment. There was no hatred in Orson's eyes, only weariness and the steady strength of a man who had carried burdens never meant to be his. In that look, Nakoa saw the truth he had fought to deny. Orson was not his enemy. He was the man who had kept Elin alive when the world turned away. Still, the ache in Nakoa's chest was near unbearable. Every instinct urged him to fight for truth, for the life taken from him. But honor held him fast. He gave a single nod to the coming night. Then Eileen's voice broke the silence, barely a breath. Nakoa, please. He turned to her and met her eyes fully. In them he saw the years they had lost and the years that still waited unsaid. If the boy had not been there, if Orson had not stood beside her, he might have reached out, just once. But the boy was watching his boy. And some truths are too heavy for innocence. He stepped back. His voice was rough but controlled. You look well, Elin. Her lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. You're alive, she whispered. For now, he answered quietly. Then he turned away. As he walked down the street, the whispers followed. The Apache's back. That poor woman. Trouble's coming, but Nakoa didn't hear them. Every sound had blurred into the thud of his own heartbeat as he moved on, leaving the street and part of himself behind. Ellen Rowe pulled the child tight against her chest, shielding him as if the world might read the truth in his face. Orson Pike's hand settled lightly on her shoulder, steady and sure. The boy's small voice cut through the moment, confused. "Mama, who was that man?" Elin knelt, smoothing his hair from his brow. Her voice shook. "No one, sweetheart. Just an old friend." The words landed like thunder in Nakoa's ears. An old friend. He didn't turn back. He didn't let her see the hurt that word carved into him. He swung into the saddle and rode through the dust, each hoofbeat pounding out a truth he refused to speak. That night he would face them both, and when the sun dropped over Red Hollow, 3 lives bound by truth, by honor, and by a love that had never truly died would be forced to reckon with everything the years had buried. The desert wind rose again, carrying a faint trace of smoke and sage. Nakoa whispered into the widening dusk, his voice breaking against the open land. "God help us all." Cold rode the valley that night. A storm brewed somewhere far off, the kind that never quite reaches you, yet settles deep in the bones. Nakoa traveled beneath a climbing moon, the world hushed, save for an occasional coyote's cry and the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed trail. He followed the creek until lamplight appeared ahead. Orson's cabin. For a moment he nearly turned back, but promises once given carry more weight than fear. He had come this far to meet the truth. The door stood ajar, lamplight spilling through the seams, gold and trembling. He stepped inside. The air smelled of wood smoke and fresh bread. By the fire sat Elin, the woman he once believed the world had taken from him. She turned at the sound of his step-breath catching. Orson stood beside her, steady yet pale, as if seeing his old friend alive was a fact his mind still struggled to accept. On the floor, the little boy played quietly with a carved wooden horse, its paint worn smooth by small hands. He looked up, curious and unafraid, eyes dark as midnight reflecting another life entirely. For a long moment no one spoke. Only the fire answered, crackling softly between them. Then Orson said low and even, "You came." Nakoa nodded once. "You asked." He felt Elaine's gaze on him, warm, trembling, afraid. She seemed ready to speak, yet unsure where to begin. At last she found her voice. "I never thought you'd come back," he finished for her. She lowered her eyes, tears catching the light. Nakoa's jaw tightened. "I came home to a grave that wasn't mine, to a letter that said I died like a dog in the dirt." His words cut sharp, not with anger but with pain, long locked away. "I need to know who sent it." Orson's face hardened. He crossed to the table, opened a drawer, and set down a folded yellowed letter between them. "It was delivered by a soldier out of Tucson," he said. "It carried your name, your regiment, your mark. We believed it. All of us. Even her." Nakoa stared at the paper as if it might still bleed truth. Memory rushed back the chaos of that fight, the crack of gunfire, the plunge into dust and darkness. He had been wounded, left for dead. He had been found days later by a passing patrol. Somewhere along the line, someone had crossed his name off ink and paper, deciding a man's fate. A clerical error. A cruel turn of war. Whatever the reason, the harm was already done. He looked back to Elin. She was shaking now, hands clenched tight in her lap. "I buried you," she whispered. "I mourned you every night. Until the baby came." Nakoa's chest seized. "The baby." Her voice fractured. "Your son." The boy lifted his head at the sound, eyes wide, unaware of the storm gathering above him. He smiled, small and shy, the same way Nakoa once had when he was young and the world was still teaching him its weight. Nakoa turned away, swallowing hard. Years of silence crashed down in that single breath. He wanted to shout, to demand why she hadn't known, why another man now stood where he once had. But when he looked at Orson, The man who had stayed through hunger, sickness, and public shame, he found no enemy. Only steady resolve, and a kind of love that asked for nothing. Orson's voice came low and even. She believed you were gone, Nakoa. We all did. I knew where her heart lived, and it wasn't with me. But a woman alone on this frontier doesn't survive long enough for truth to catch her. He paused, then continued without pride or bitterness. I gave her my name so she and the boy could live without the world tearing them apart. Truth spoken plain. Nakoa's eyes burned. He turned back to Elin, and the fury that had carried him this far softened into grief. You did what you had to, he said quietly. She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I did what the world forced me to, but not a single day passed that I didn't pray you'd walk through that door. The silence that followed held no blame, only the weight of years stolen. Nakoa's gaze drifted to the boy. Ashen, that was his name. He remembered hearing it once murmured in the street. The child's small hands clutched the carved horse tightly, the same toy Nakoa had made long ago for Elin's hope chest. He knelt slowly, meeting the boy's curious eyes. For the first time he allowed himself to feel what he had already known. This was his flesh, his blood, his life returned. The boy smiled and offered him the toy. You can play too, he said softly. Nakoa's throat closed. He gently placed the horse back into the boy's hands. Keep it safe, little one. It's yours. He stood turning to Orson and Elin, his voice rough. You both carried what I could not. I have no right to anger. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the fire, then back to them. But I can't stay. Not tonight. Elin stepped forward. Nakoa, please. He shook his head, his voice barely more than breath. God forgive the living for doing what it takes to survive. Then he turned and stepped into the night, the door closing softly behind him. Outside, the desert wind rose again, cold, unyielding, carrying the scent of rain that would never quite fall. Nakoa stood beneath the stars, staring into the dark firelight, flickering behind him, like a memory he could neither hold nor release. Inside the small cabin, the boy's laughter rang out, innocent, bright, and painfully familiar. The weeks that followed turned slow, like a blade twisting inch by inch. Winter slid down from the mountains, bringing long nights and breath that lingered like ghosts in the air. In Red Hollow, even time seemed to be holding its breath. Orson Pike was the first to feel the edge of the season. It began as a cough, small, easy to ignore, the kind a man shrugs off after years of dust and cold nights. But it deepened. By December, it tore through him like wind through dry pine. Consumption. Silas Marin said one word that meant everything and nothing at once. No cure. No mercy. Only time thinning with every breath. Still Orson worked. He split wood when he could, patched fences between coughing fits. He told himself the blood on his handkerchief was only the cold. Elin knew better, but she never spoke the word. Some truths are too cruel to give a voice. Nakoa kept his distance at first, staying to the edges of the valley. He told himself he was granting them peace. The truth was simpler and harder. He didn't know how to face the man who had lived the life meant for him. Yet night after night, his campfire burned within sight of the cabin, a silent vigil, an unspoken promise. From afar, he watched the chimney smoke rise each morning. He saw Ellen tending the boy's shawl, pulled tight against the wind. He saw Orson thinner now, shoulders bowed, but hands still steady as he guided Ashen's small fingers through the careful work of mending a fence. Without words, Nakoa knew time was slipping away. One evening after the sun sank and frost glittered along the creek, a shadow approached Nakoa's camp. He rose fast, hand to his rifle, then stopped. Orson. He rode slow, each breath shallow, a blanket draped over his shoulders. When he reached the fire, he dismounted with effort, leaning against the saddle before stepping forward. Mind if I sit? He asked, voice rough with sickness and pride. Nakoa nodded and motioned to the fire. For a long while neither spoke. Pine cracked in the flames. Somewhere distant a nighthawk cried. Then Orson said quietly, "You've been watching us." Nakoa didn't deny it. Hard not to. A faint smile crossed Orson's lips. "You deserve to." He paused. "The boy, he's yours." Nakoa's chest tightened. He had always known, but hearing it aloud landed with both relief and pain. Orson leaned forward, eyes fixed on the fire. "When I'm gone, they'll need someone strong enough to love them both." He lifted his gaze. "Promise me you'll be that man." Nakoa turned away, jaw set. "You ask much of me." Orson gave a thin, dry laugh. "No, my friend, I'm asking for what you already want." The words settled heavy and true. Nakoa looked at him, really looked. The man who had once been his brother now sat hollowed by illness, yet lit by something greater than pride. Love in its quietest form, the kind that gives instead of taking. Orson coughed again, bending with the effort. When he straightened his eyes, held a calm Nakoa couldn't quite grasp. "She still loves you," he said softly. "Always has, but she won't leave me while I breathe. She's too loyal for that." He swallowed, then continued, "When I'm gone, don't let that loyalty become a cage." Nakoa's throat closed. No words were big enough for that kind of grace. "I'll take care of them," he said hoarsely. "You have my word." Orson nodded slowly. "Then I can rest easier. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon." Orson struggled to his feet, hands shaking as he reached for the reins. Nakoa rose at once, steadying him. For a brief moment they stood together, the dying man and the one who would carry his word. Not rivals, brothers bound by the same love for one woman and one child. Orson looked at him, weariness softening his eyes. "Goodbye, brother," he said quietly. Nakoa's reply barely carried. "Goodbye." Then Orson rode back toward the faint glow of his home, the slow uneven rhythm of hooves, dissolving into night until only silence remained. Nakoa watched until the last shadow vanished and the fire sank low. What had once been jealousy had become something sacred, a trust handed over without question. Winter came early that year. The sky turned the dull gray of pewter and the wind cut through the valley like a blade. Frost traced the window panes at dawn. The creek, once bright and laughing, slowed beneath a thin skin of ice. Inside the cabin on the rise, the fire burned day and night, yet never seemed to warm enough. Orson's cough echoed through the walls weaker now, as if each breath were borrowed. Elin sat at his side, wiping his brow with trembling hands, whispering prayers she no longer believed would be answered. The boy slept near the hearth, curled in a blanket, unaware the world was preparing to let go of something good. Nakoa came every day without asking. He brought wood, hunted game, repaired fences no one else could face. He spoke little, his voice belonged to silence now, but his presence never wavered, a quiet anchor against the storm to come. He and Orson rarely named what they both knew. Men like them did not waste breath on death. Sometimes their eyes met across the firelight, and that was enough. Between them lived a simple truth. One man was leaving, the other staying. Both understood the weight of it. When the first snow fell, the world went still. Mountains disappeared into white. The valley lay hushed beneath winter's breath. It was that morning Orson Pike drew his final breath. Elin woke before dawn, to the sound of his struggle. She called his name, her voice breaking the words, dissolving like mist. Nakoa was already on the porch when she cried out. He rushed to her side, cold biting his hands as he reached for Orson's shoulders. The dying man's eyes fluttered open. For one moment, peace crossed his face, the quiet peace of a man who knows the fight is finished. He looked at Ellen, then at Nakoa. "It's time," he whispered. She shook her head, tears streaming. "No, not yet. You've carried me long enough." He reached for Nakoa's hand and gripped it with the strength only duty and love can summon. "Keep your promise," he murmured. "Take care of them." Nakoa's throat closed. He nodded once. I will. Orson's gaze softened. Good. Then I can rest. And with that, he was gone. They buried him that afternoon on a rise overlooking the valley where the cottonwoods met the wind. The ground was frozen hard. Nakoa's hands bled before the grave was deep enough to hold a man's peace. He did not stop until it was done. Beside him, Elin stood pale and still, the boy clutching her hand as the last earth fell. She knelt and placed a single sprig of cedar atop the mound. Her voice trembled in the cold air. He saved us when the world turned cruel. Nakoa bowed his head. Then I'll honor him by keeping that promise alive. The wind moved through the trees, whispering like a benediction. In the weeks that followed, grief drifted through the cabin like a constant shadow, quiet, patient, never named. Elin moved through her days without words, her face worn thin yet steady. The boy grew subdued, his laughter traded for long spells of thoughtfulness no child should have to carry. Nakoa stayed close. He worked the land, hunted when the pantry ran low, fixed the roof as the snow began to loosen its grip. He did not speak of Orson. He did not press Ellen with comfort she wasn't ready to accept. He simply remained. Because love, he had learned, was sometimes nothing more than presence. Each night the fire burned, and when the boy cried out in his sleep, Nakoa would hum an old Apache lullaby, the same one his mother had once sung to him. The child would settle, curling into the sound, as if it were something he had always known. Day by day, the valley softened. Snow slid from branches revealing green beneath the frost. Slowly the boy's laughter returned, first hesitant, then free. He followed Nakoa everywhere, small boots stepping into the larger tracks ahead of him. He asked about horses, about hunting, about the strange songs his new friend sang when he thought no one listened. Each answer drew the boy closer, not from obligation but trust. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the mountains, Elin called her son to her. She knelt beside him near the hearth, brushing hair from his brow. Her voice trembled. "Sweetheart, do you know how much your papa loved you?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mama." She hesitated, eyes flicking to Nakoa, who stood quietly by the door. "And do you know the man who's been teaching you to ride, the one who hums those songs?" The boy's eyes lit up. Nakoa. A faint smile crossed Elin's face, tears shining. "Yes, he's your father." The boy blinked, confusion giving way to wonder. Then without a pause he ran to Nakoa and wrapped small arms around him. "Papa," he said simply. The word broke something open inside Nakoa, not with pain, but release. He knelt, holding the child close, arms shaking with a joy long denied. "Yes, son," he whispered. Elin watched, tears streaming, her heart lighter than it had been in years. In that quiet, sacred moment, the weight of grief began to lift. Winter had taken much, but what it left behind was stronger love, reborn not from passion or memory, but from survival, forgiveness, and the fragile grace of beginning again. Spring arrived early that year, as if the valley itself had grown tired of mourning. Snow slipped quietly from the hills. The creek found its song again, a sound of life, of return. Cottonwoods stirred with green, and wildflowers pushed through ground once held tight by frost. Nakoa and Elin worked side by side in those first gentle days of warmth. He mended fences while she planted the garden. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Words were no longer needed as they once were. Silence had become its own kind of prayer. The boy Ashen ran through the grass, laughter chasing the wind. He was stronger now, sure-footed now, his eyes bright with mischief. Ashen followed Nakoa out into the fields. He learned the names of birds, the patterns of deer tracks, and the hidden places where the earth still breathed in time with the sky. At night, when the fire burned low, Elin would sit at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching them together. There was no guilt left in her heart, only gratitude. Life, she had learned, never offers perfection, only moments worth holding. They visited Orson's grave often, not with grief, but with calm. Grass had grown thick along the rise now, wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. Elin would kneel, brush aside a fallen leaf, and speak softly to the wind. He saved us when the world turned cruel. We haven't forgotten. Nakoa always stood nearby, hat in hand, head bowed. Sometimes he left a small carving, a bird, a horse, tokens of quiet remembrance. He never spoke much there. He didn't need to. Respect, loyalty, and a promise kept were written in every action. When they walked away, their hands were always joined, not as lovers weighed down by the past, but as two souls who had survived it. The valley once marked by sorrow became home again. Nakoa built new corrals and taught Ashen how to ride. Elin filled the cabin with warmth, music, laughter, the smell of fresh bread and wild sage. In the evenings, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed red behind the mountains. Crickets sang. Cattle lowed in the distance. Peace had come not as a gift, but as something earned. Sometimes Elin would turn to Nakoa and smile. I used to think life had nothing left to give me but loss. He would meet her gaze, eyes gentle, and say nothing. She'd glance toward the boy chasing fireflies in the dusk. Now she'd say softly, I believe in tomorrow again. Nakoa would take her hand, calloused, warm, and she would let it rest there, steady and sure. No grand vows, no promises spoken aloud, just belonging. The frontier was never kind to dreamers. It took more than it gave. But in its dust and silence, love learned how to endure. Elin had loved two men, one who saved her life and one who gave it meaning. Together they built a peace the world could not take. The years ahead would not be easy. Life on the frontier never was, but laughter lived in the cabin again, and hope grew in the garden, tended by joined hands. The land remembered every sorrow that passed over it. And it remembered this too: forgiveness once planted will bloom even in the hardest ground. Would you have waited for him, or found a way to survive? What would you have done in Elin's place? Share your thoughts below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales, where love endures against the odds and even the harshest land can still grow something beautiful. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.